Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Islands Trust situation. I worry that, average British Columbians aren't really aware of what's happening there. And the way it kind of ties in with the Musqueam decision, there's so much focus on Aboriginal title and how that has been declared a Cowichan, but that's a very long process to get a court decision. But this business of land use and who's in charge of what. I know with the Islands Trust, there's all this vague language about co-management of the
Mhm.
resource.
Mhm.
When it comes right down to it, that can has real practical implications for what people are doing, say, in the Gulf Islands,
Mhm.
or where someone can anchor a boat, or they can have a dock,
Yeah,
or where they might be able to build a cabin.
correct.
And this is sort of rolling out across the entire lower mainland with these agreements for co-management. So what is the status with the Islands Trust thing right now?
Well, the whole DRIPA mandate has now been sort of downloaded into their governing documents, is my understanding. And I have to do a deep dive into it. But what people are telling me is that, for example, any meetings they hold now that are about the island, like on Laskidi, they're starting with these lengthy land acknowledgments, and it goes on and on. And if anybody says, "Hey," they're told you have to leave. I mean, it's gotten really sort of militant. And the other thing, like we know about a specific situation on Galliano, which involves a cemetery there, a cemetery that was started back in the, I guess, late 1700s or early 1800s by settlers who came to that island and apparently lived in peace and co-married and commingled and lived with the native people there. And there was a small cemetery there that has the tombstones and so on of people who died there, but who were settlers, and it's called Cemetery for the Settlers of Galliano Island. And there are indigenous people buried there, settlers, and people who were married together or buried side by side, and they were, interracial or whatever you want to call it, marriages. So the cemetery that they had was tiny. It's just located sort of just off the water, and they had actually run out of room, and a lot of people still living there wanted to be buried in the same cemetery. So they did a fundraising work to raise money to buy another contiguous piece of land that's also not huge, but it was, a certain size. And this land was owned by a family from Seattle, and it was worth approximately $180,000. But this family, they're philanthropists, and they said, we'll sell it to you for half the price. So I believe the price ended up being around 90,000 for this contiguous plot. So they held the traditional way we used to raise money. They didn't use any government money. They raised it through bake sales, music nights, fundraising, I heard one resident of the island gave like $10,000 just because he was in support of having this cemetery there. And bearing in mind, this cemetery was open to everyone, whether you were indigenous or non. And so it was like a non-racial cemetery. And so a decision was made to say that no more non-Aboriginal people can be buried there anymore. After they had bought the land, they had done this. And this is a true story that's going on in Galliano right now. And all these people who have done all this work actually to work together in unity with the indigenous people on that island were caught like, what? What are you talking about? We've been friends for decades. We get along. My brother's married to like it was this huge upset. And it was somebody who came in onto the board and started pushing this, and they pushed all the right buttons and said, no, this is going to happen. And they actually went into the cemetery that was there with a little bobcat or whatever it was and dropped loam, and they rolled right over some people's headstones, and they dropped loam 8 inches deep over top of it and said, you're not allowed to ever dig below the surface again. And if you do want to do anything, you can sprinkle just on top of the loam, and they won't let any people be buried in the other property they've purchased now. So it's such a bizarre situation, but this is what's happened. And actually, when we were filming my documentary, Making a Killing, we interviewed an amazing woman there and the two men who run the island newspaper, and they are so upset. And these are not, you know, people you would say are, the racists and bad people. These are people who have been working with this community all the way through and raised money for them and helped them and loved them and actually worked to build a museum there that's filled with native art and all these kinds of things. And so now they're finding out that they're not allowed to have, like, the one lady we interviewed is 82, amazing woman, and she just said, I can't believe this. I want to be buried beside my parents. They're there and they're telling me I can't be. And that's what's happened. And so this is one sort of small but big story for the island because it's caused this, of course, division and uproar when everybody was getting along. But this is
Mm.
part of it. And it came to my attention about Galliano because I was contacted by a resident there who showed me a flyer that came out from the Islands Trust, or the trustee groups that's over Galliano, saying that all people who weren't of Native ancestry now had to apply for development permits on the island, but anybody who could show their ancestry does not have to get a development permit. That was the first thing, and then came the cemetery. And so you can see that, and of course, what bothers me about this is anything that's rooted in racist, like race-based laws is very dangerous. And like then it comes down to, well, who's native and who's not, and how many degrees of native, and so that's
Wow.
a little story from Galliano for you. And they're finding out about the docks and things like that. People are finding out their docks aren't adequate or they have to be taken out. And Pender Harbor's already been hit with that. That's not Islands Trust, but that's the territory being declared by the Sechelt Nation over vast areas of the Sunshine Coast, Nelson Island, Pender Harbor, Madeira Park, that area. So it's
Wow.
this joint
Yeah.
governance thing that's the problem.